Have you ever wondered what's involved in turning a wooden pen like one of these? Well, this video is going to show you the steps that I use to turn some of these pens. This is an Atrax style pen. This is a Baron style, and I get all of my pen blanks, pen material from my friends in Guelph at William Woodwright. You can find them at penblanks.ca online. And I start by gathering everything I need. So I've got the pen kits, I've got the drill bits that I'm going to need, I've got the bushings, the wooden blanks that I'm going to use, the pen tubes, some of the other tooling that I'm going to need, and I've got the same for the Baron kits. So let's get going. The first step is to scuff the outside of the brass tubes that will be glued inside of the wooden blank, and this scuffing up helps to give the glue a bit more bite. And you can do this by hand, but I find using this flap sander at my drill press works quite well and is quite a bit faster. So I hold the tubes on this 7mm mandrel. I've got the knurled threaded knob on the end so the tube doesn't go flying off. And I'll start up the drill press and you can see how easy it is to do. These are the two wooden blanks I'm using for the two Baron pens. This one is olive wood. This one is a yellow cedar burl. And I mark the cut line for the top and the bottom of the pen. And I also draw a line through so that after I cut them, I know the orientation. When I assemble the pen, let me bring the pen in like this, I want to make sure that the grain is continuous as it runs up here. So I don't want to have this piece reversed like that, because then I don't have a continuous grain match. So this pen line will help me to keep things aligned. I use this simple sled to make the cut at my bandsaw. I'll be drilling 4 different hole sizes in these blanks because each pen has 2 different diameter brass tubes. So to avoid making any mistakes, I've marked each one with the correct hole size, and I'll go to my drill press and start drilling. I'm using this vise intended to hold the pen blank so that I can drill the hole, and I've set it up so that the hole is going to be in the center, although I've just eyeballed it. And it's okay if the hole is not perfectly in the center when it comes out at the bottom, because most of this wood is going to get turned away at the lathe anyhow. Here's the hole all the way drilled through, and you would have seen that I was retracting the drill bit quite a bit as I was drilling. I wanted to clear the chips because I didn't want any of the chips getting caught, which would cause the hole to get enlarged. So that's why I retracted the bit quite a bit. And you can see that the hole is not in the center at the bottom, and that's fine. There's still plenty of wood here that I will turn away at the lathe. So I will continue drilling the rest of the blanks with all of the drill bits, the different size drill bits, and then we'll go on to the next step. I'm now ready to glue the tubes into the wooden pen blanks. I use 5-minute epoxy for that. You can also use thick CA glue. Before you do any gluing though, you need to plug the ends of the tubes. Otherwise, when you insert the tube into the wood, you'll end up with glue inside of the tube and you won't be able to get the pen mechanism put together correctly. So I find the best thing for that is this base plate wax that you can get from penblanks.ca, and it's just a simple matter of poking each of the tubes into the wax so that you plug the end. I've mixed up the 5-minute epoxy and I'm ready to start gluing, and my procedure is to get a bunch of glue on one end of the tube. And let's make sure you can see this. Insert that into the blank, spinning it around sort of to coat the inside of the blank, and I pull it out and take a look. and it looks like it's been coated, so that's good. And then I get epoxy on the other end. This is where wearing gloves is good because you end up with epoxy all over. And I'll put the tube in the opposite end, spin it around, and again pull it out just to make sure, make sure I've got everything coated. And then I'll push it all the way in, wipe off the excess glue from the end, and push it in a little bit further so that I want to make sure that there's extra wood on both ends. And once the glue is dried, I can try to pop out the wax that I put in, and depending on how much epoxy is at the end of the tube, I may be able to get the wax out like that. But this end I may have too much epoxy, and if that's the case, I'll take out whatever I can, and then I'll head over to my disc sander and I'll remove some of this excess wood, which will also get rid of some of the epoxy. I'm here at my disc sander, and you can see with this olive wood blank, I wasn't able to get out all of the epoxy. You can see there's quite a bit that ran out after I put the tube in. So I'll sand away some of that, making sure that I don't sand all the way to the end of the tube. As I do sand, the heat from the sander will soften the epoxy a little bit, and it'll also make it thinner as I get closer to the end of the tube, and it makes it a lot easier to pop it off. After you clear the tubes out of the wax and the epoxy, it's time to trim back the wood so that it's flush with the end of the tube. And you have to do that at both ends. And you can use a pen barrel trimmer to do that. My preferred method, though, is to use my disc sander. My approach is pretty simple. I've got a set of transfer punches, and I find the one that fits inside the tube with minimal play. And for this one, it's this transfer punch. I've got holes in this block of wood that I've drilled at my drill press, so I know that they're perpendicular to the surface here. And I've got a runner on the bottom that goes in the T-track. So all I need to do is put the blank over the transfer punch, and then I can advance it towards the sander, and I'll be careful as I remove wood, because what I want to end up with is I want to just barely skim the surface of the tube. So what I'll be looking for as I bring the blank off is the color of the brass will change as soon as I've started to sand it. And I'll show you what that looks like in a second. Here's what I'm looking for. The end of the brass tube has an even shine because I've just lightly sanded it as I've sanded back the wood. So as soon as I see that brass shine, I stop sanding, and I'm now ready to sand the other end of the wood. You may be tempted just to freehand sand this until you see the brass, but the problem with that is when you were drilling into the wood, the hole may not have been perpendicular to the surface, and the wood itself is often slightly distorted. So you really need something that ensures that the face of this wood is perpendicular to the tube, the brass tube. We've got our pen blanks ready to turn. I've got my bushings here. These are the ones for the Baron. These are the ones for the 8-tracks. And remember when we drew that line across the blank so that we could keep the grain oriented? Well, as soon as we start turning, we're going to lose that line. So what I like to do is use a marker, and I'll mark inside the tube. I'll just put a line inside both of the tubes so that I know which end had the line when I originally cut the blank in half. There are a couple of options to mount your pen blank so that you can turn it at your lathe. You can use something like this, which is called a pen mandrel. It has this 7mm shaft. The alternative is to do what's called turning between centers, and that's my preferred approach. Here's the setup for turning between centers. There are two pieces. This piece mounts in your headstock, and the tailstock has a piece with a bearing, and both of these have 7mm shafts. and you can mount the bushing right over the shaft and then bring this up. And now this is ready to turn. My preferred turning tool is this roughing gouge, and this is razor sharp, and it's rather large compared to the size of the pen blank, but I find it gives me lots of control, and I'm able to get a nice clean surface off of this. You can also use a scraper or a skew, just depends what you're comfortable with at the lathe. I'm all set up for turning this blank. Since this is fairly small in diameter, I've got my lathe set at a high speed. I've got my chisel ready, my respirator set, and I'm wearing my safety glasses. So let's give this a try. Keep a close eye on the bushings as you turn the pen. You want the ends of the pen barrel to match the bushing diameter. Your fingers are quite sensitive at feeling any differences. I take very light cuts to sneak up on a perfect match and then feather the cut into the middle of the blank. All right, with the pen blank shaped, it needs to be sanded. And I start with 180 grit paper with the lathe running at a medium speed, and initially I focus on the middle section of the blank. And you'll likely have some ridges in the turning, and those are easily sanded away, as you can see here. Once the middle section is smooth, I sand the ends, trying not to remove too much wood, since I want the diameter of the blank to match the bushings. At this point, the pen blank is smooth, but it will have a lot of cross-grain scratches from the 180 grit paper. For the rest of the sanding, I turn off the lathe and sand along the length of the pen blank. I work my way up the grits all the way to 2000 grit. You want to sand right to the ends of the blank, which I find is easier if I loosen the tailstock so there is a gap between the blank and the bushing. Before I apply a finish, I use my magnifying glasses and I wipe down each of the blanks with denatured alcohol, and this does a couple of things. It allows me to see if there are any scratches or any imperfections that I need to take care of before I apply the finish. It also pulls any of the sawdust out of the pores, which is good before I apply the finish, and it also gives me an idea of what the wood is going to look like after the finish is applied. Okay, we're finally at the point where we can apply a finish to these pen blanks. And do you remember this pen mandrel I showed you earlier? Well, this works perfectly to apply the finish. So I use that with these non-stick bushings, and they hold the pen blanks in place. And I'm using a CA glue. In this case, it's a Glue Boost product, but there are a number of other CA glues on the market that work equally as well. And I find that a CA finish is the hardest finish, and it buffs to the highest gloss of anything that I've tried. So that is my finish of choice when I'm making pens. My buddy Ramon Valdez has an excellent YouTube video on applying a CA finish to a knob, which is very similar to the process that I use here. So rather than repeating the steps that he's done, I'm going to refer you to his video, and I think you're going to like that. And if you're not following Ramon on YouTube or on Instagram, you're really missing out. So give him a follow. It doesn't take long for the CA finish to cure, and you can move on to sanding. And a lot of people wet sand with micro mesh abrasives, which works well. I find I have good success by dry sanding, and I start with typically 320 grit sanding and power sand to even out the surface, and then I switch to hand sanding like I'm showing here, sanding always with the grain along the length of the tube, although with this burl there's not much grain showing, and I'm making sure that I get right to the end of the tube, and I work my way up the grits to 2000 grit. And I'm doing this while I'm wearing my magnifying glasses, and I'm looking for any imperfections. I'm looking for little pits which are low spots, which means I need to continue sanding to get down to that low spot. And I'm also looking for any scratches from the previous grit. And at the end, with this 2000 grit sandpaper, I can't see any scratches, even under magnification. And I've got a nice dull surface, even, uniform, dull surface that's ready to buff. As a result of applying the CA finish, you'll often get some ridges at the end of the pen tube, and you need to remove those. And I use a sharp knife, this X-Acto knife, and I'll just peel it away. The end of the pen blank needs to be perfectly flush for the pen mechanism to seat properly. And I've removed the high spots with a knife, but it's still not perfectly smooth. So I'm using 220 grit sandpaper, and I'm very carefully sanding the end and taking a look until I've got a uniform surface like that. I don't want to sand it at an angle, because then the pen mechanism definitely wouldn't seat properly. I'm now at my favorite step in the turning, and that is to use this Beal buffing system to bring out a high gloss in the pen blanks. And just a warning, if you're using something like this, my particle counter shows that these give off all kinds of dust in the air, which you may not be able to see. So wear your respirator. Buffing the blanks is easy, but you have to hold the blanks securely or it will get pulled out of your hands. As you can see, I'm using the shaft from a pen mandrel just in case I lose grip. It only takes a few seconds on each wheel to do the buffing. Be sure to get to both ends of the blank. So here's the reward. Look at that shine. This is the olive wood one. And as I spin that, you can see there's no distortion at all in the light, meaning this is a perfectly smooth surface. And the same is true for this cedar burl. I've invested a fair bit of time up to now to get these pen blanks where they are. So I want to be very careful that I assemble the pen correctly. So I refer to the instructions. This is an Atrax pen, and I'm going to use this pen press to press in the parts. So I'm starting with the large barrel here, and I've got this plastic piece with the chrome piece on the end, and I'm going to press that in, and you'll see how the press works. Just very gradually pushes it in. This is where you'll see if you've turned the ends of the pen to the exact size of the bushing. As you run your finger between the metal and the wood, there should be a smooth transition without any catches. And that's what I've got here. Here's a look at 3 of the finished pens, and I'm really pleased with how they turned out. Thanks for watching, and please reach out with any comments or questions.